In the volatile world of energy geopolitics, few countries have undergone as dramatic a transformation between 2023 and 2025 as Canada. Once seen as tethered to the United States through pipelines, electricity grids, and legacy trade agreements, Canada is now rewriting its role as a global energy supplier. Prime Minister Mark Carney's strategic blueprint has not only reshaped Canada's energy export policies, but also marked a definitive shift in the country's international posture, moving from dependence to diversification, and from reaction to leadership. The story begins in early 2023, a time when Canada was still heavily reliant on the United States for oil and gas exports. Nearly 90% of Canada's crude oil and natural gas flowed south into American markets, feeding US refineries and power plants. For decades, this arrangement made economic sense: shared infrastructure, minimal transportation costs, and close regulatory cooperation. But under the surface, cracks were forming. Rising protectionism in the US, including sporadic threats of tariffs on Canadian energy, and the weaponization of cross-border pipelines during political disputes, especially Line 5 and Keystone XL, forced Canadian policymakers to confront an uncomfortable truth: dependence was now a liability. Mark Carney, a former governor of both the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, entered office with a background few politicians could match. His understanding of global financial systems, climate risk, and energy markets wasn't just academic. It was practical. He knew how quickly investor sentiment could shift, how ESG priorities were transforming markets, and how Canada's fossil fuel-dependent economy risked falling behind in the global energy transition. His campaign promised to keep Canada's energy sector competitive, but with a 21st century twist: cleaner, smarter, and geopolitically resilient. By mid-2023, the LNG Canada megaproject in Kitimat, British Columbia, was at the centre of this transformation. After years of delays, cost overruns, and environmental litigation, the project, backed by Shell, Petronas, PetroChina, Mitsubishi, and Korea Gas, entered its final construction phase. LNG Canada became more than an export terminal; it was a symbol of Canada's pivot toward Asian markets. The liquefied natural gas produced in northern British Columbia wouldn't be flowing to the US Midwest. It would head across the Pacific to Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan, strategic partners eager to reduce their dependence on Russian and Middle Eastern gas. Carney's government didn't just support LNG Canada, it supercharged it. A series of federal loan guarantees, fast-tracked environmental reviews, and new rail-to-pipeline incentives helped unlock $15 billion in additional foreign investment in related infrastructure by early 2024. Carney also announced plans to replicate the Kitimat model on the East Coast, eyeing export terminals in Nova Scotia and Newfoundland that would send LNG to Europe. Canada's message was clear: we are not just your friendly neighbour to the north, we are your next reliable supplier. But natural gas was only part of the equation. Electricity exports, long overshadowed by oil and gas, became a top policy priority. Canada's electricity sector is among the cleanest in the world, with 82% of power generated from non-emitting sources, primarily hydro, nuclear, and wind. That made it an attractive export to US states desperate to meet new decarbonization mandates, particularly in New York, New England, and the upper Midwest. However, Carney's team wasn't content with merely feeding US grids. They wanted leverage. In 2024, the Carney administration quietly revised the North American electricity export guidelines, requiring that all new transmission capacity projects be paired with Canadian ownership stakes and reciprocal market access. This policy, while technical, had massive implications. It meant Canadian utilities like Hydro-Québec, BC Hydro, and Ontario Power Generation wouldn't just export electrons, they'd co-own infrastructure, dictate rates, and shape policy in US states hungry for clean energy. It was a subtle assertion of sovereignty, and one that Washington noticed. Then came crude oil. While critics expected Carney to phase out support for oil exports in favor of green energy, the opposite occurred, at least in the short term. Recognizing that global demand for heavy crude wasn't going away, the Carney government focused on strategic modernization instead. The Trans Mountain Expansion, TMX, long mired in legal and activist delays, was finally completed in late 2023. With 890,000 barrels per day now flowing from Alberta to the Port of Vancouver, Canada unlocked access to global markets for the first time at scale. China, India, and Indonesia quickly became buyers, lured by favorable pricing and long-term contracts. But Carney went further. His government introduced a sovereign oil pricing strategy, establishing a floor price for long-term contracts that would shield Canadian producers from market whiplash while rewarding buyers with security of supply. The strategy turned heads at OPEC meetings and in Washington. For the first time, Canada was attempting to behave like a swing producer, not undercutting the Saudis, but offering a Western-aligned alternative to petro-authoritarian regimes. At the same time, new pipeline diplomacy emerged. Rather than battle U.S. courts and activists over aging cross-border pipelines like Line 5 and Line 3, Carney's administration began actively pursuing bilateral deals with Japan, South Korea, and even Germany to co-invest in dedicated Canadian pipelines, ports, and refineries. A 2025 deal with Japan's JOGMEC, Japan Oil, Gas and Metals National Corporation, resulted in a $6 billion co-funded pipeline project linking Alberta oil sands to Prince Rupert, with Japanese firms guaranteed 25 years of supply. This wasn't just energy trade. It was geopolitical hedging, on Canada's terms. None of this happened without friction. U.S. lawmakers, particularly those from Michigan and Minnesota, protested what they saw as Canada's weaponization of energy diplomacy. Tariff threats returned. So did aggressive lobbying from American oil majors concerned about losing preferential Canadian crude access. But Ottawa stood firm. In a 2024 speech at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Carney delivered his now famous line, "Canada is open for energy trade, but not on our knees." Beyond fossil fuels, Carney's energy strategy embraced next-generation exports as well. Small modular reactors, SMRs, became a key pillar of his clean energy vision. With Ontario Power Generation leading the charge, Canada began exporting nuclear technology and expertise to emerging economies, including Poland, the Philippines, and the UAE. The SMRs weren't just tools for climate mitigation. They were instruments of diplomacy, packaged with Canadian engineering services, fuel supply contracts, and multilateral financing from Export Development Canada. The results were striking. Between 2023 and 2025, Canada's energy export profile shifted dramatically. U.S. market share dropped from 89% to 71% across oil, gas, and electricity. Asia surged from 5% to 19%, while Europe climbed from 3% to nearly 10%. These weren't just numbers. They were tectonic shifts. Canada was no longer the junior partner in a North American energy deal. It was an energy sovereign, balancing markets, projecting power, and commanding premium pricing. Domestically, Carney's critics warned of overreach. Environmentalists argued the LNG boom undermined Canada's climate credibility, while Western premiers demanded more autonomy in negotiating their own export deals. But the Carney government countered with results. Oil royalties surged. Provincial budgets in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Newfoundland recorded their first surpluses in years. National GDP rose 1.2% faster than projected in 2024, largely due to energy trade gains. And foreign direct investment in Canadian energy infrastructure hit a record $48 billion, doubling from just 2 years earlier. Perhaps most importantly, the Canadian public backed the shift. A 2025 Ipsos poll found that 68% of Canadians supported diversifying energy exports away from the US, even if it meant short-term trade tensions. Among those under 35, support for SMR exports and global LNG deals was even higher, signaling a generational shift in how Canadians view their country's role in the energy world, not just as a steward of the environment, but as a strategic actor on the global stage. Mark Carney's energy strategy is far from complete. But its early results have already redrawn the map. Canada is no longer just America's northern gas station. It's becoming a global energy hub, supplying Asia with LNG, Europe with clean electricity, and the world with nuclear innovation. For a country long defined by its resources, but hesitant to wield them, the years from 2023 to 2025 mark a turning point. Energy isn't just what Canada exports. It's how Canada leads.